Hey there, I'm glad you're back. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe. I got a story to share. One that is less about humans and more about beasts. This one's dark. Be comfortable, here I begin. You might not have heard about me, but the hunters know my name. The shivering ones. They piss their linens when they see a flash of silver fur and a broken canine 8 feet up, charging through the fog like a church bell's final toll. Drako Silversmouth. They spit between trembling teeth. They made the name up, those cryptid chasers. Thought they were clever, calling me by the color of my pelt and the gap where that tooth cracked off the priest's skull. I didn't choose the name. I earned it, but that's not where this began. You want the truth, the rot, the whole thing? Then let me take you back to when I was still a boy. London, 1665. They called it God's punishment, a cleansing of sins. But when your neighbors are vomiting blood into the street and the dogs won't even chew the bones anymore, you stop thinking of it as holy. The Great Plague didn't knock. It barged in, burned the cradle, and pissed on the ashes. We'd hear the bells. 1 toll for a death, 2 if it was a child. But then came a week where they just rang and rang and rang until the rope frayed and snapped. They called them death carts. They'd come at dawn. Hooded men with wax-sealed faces, hauling bodies like firewood. Sometimes the dead weren't all the way dead. You'd hear the scratching, the begging. But the cart didn't stop. Once your name was on the list, you were part of the stack. That's how I went. I was the coughing kind. Black spit. Fingers like twigs. No one could look at me. Not my ma. Not the old neighbor with the wooden nose. Not even my father, though he wasn't around to look. Gone before the plague, off chasing beasts that didn't belong in chapbooks or sermon stories. He wasn't the kind of man who came home with blood on his boots from men. The blood was usually something else's. He said there were rules to the dark, rules that even monsters feared. I didn't understand then, I do now. When the blisters started bursting, Ma stopped bringing broth. She left a loaf by the door and wouldn't enter the room. I knew what that meant. I heard her whispering to Father Colm. Something about mercy. I wasn't supposed to hear, but I did. That night, I crawled out the window and lay in the alley until the death cart rolled past. Let them take me, I thought. Let it in quick. They didn't ask questions. Just a poke with the iron rod to check for twitching. I didn't flinch. Eyes open. Breath shallow. One of the men grunted and tied the tag to my foot. Died of plague, it read. I remember that string. Tighter than it needed to be. Bastard must have enjoyed it. They dumped me in a pit near Limehouse, not a grave. No one dug those anymore. Just a hollowed trench lined with rotted canvas and sour lime. There were others. Dozens, all twisted like broken dolls. I landed on a woman with no face. Flies swarmed her, thick enough to make noise. I stayed there, hours and days flied. Hard to say, time stopped keeping track of me. Then came the cold. Not wind, not chill, cold from inside. Like the marrow of my bones was icing over. I thought that was death coming proper. But then something moved in the trench. Not man, not rat, something that breathed like it didn't have lungs. It didn't growl, it didn't snarl. Just the crunch of dirt shifting, the wet slide of paw over stone. Then teeth, white as chalk, and a flash of fur like hammered silver. The last thing I remember from the old life is the pop in my neck. Like a twig snapping. My body bent wrong. Mouth open in a scream I couldn't finish. And those eyes, yellow but wrong, like molten metal still cooling. The beast looked at me, not like prey, more like pity. Then it vanished. Voices came next, from above. Over there. It went south towards the marsh. By Christ, did you see it? Hounds lost the scent near the well. Cryptid hunters, I didn't know the word then, but I'd learn it well. Men who made their living chasing things the church refused to name. Men like my father. Their boots stomped above me, but no one looked down. I wasn't even a corpse worth checking. The pit was too full, and the smell too loud. But I wasn't dead. Something stirred in me. Not breath, not life, but hunger. Like something cracking open behind my ribs. The burn started in my spine. My fingers twitched, my ears rang. Every heartbeat felt like being kicked from the inside out. I lay in that pile until night, until the full moon painted the trench in bruised light. Then I stood. My legs didn't work right. My arms hung long. My face itched like it was peeling itself apart. My stomach ached with a need I couldn't name. I climbed out slow, naked, half-rotted, and new. A watchman saw me crawling out and dropped his lantern. Ran so fast he left one boot behind. I remember thinking, he thinks I'm dead. He wasn't wrong. I wandered the alleys for hours. I didn't recognize the city anymore. Windows boarded, bells silenced. Horses dead in the harness, tongues lolling. Children crying in empty rooms with no one left to hush them. And yet, in all that rot, something called me. Not a voice. More like a scent, old blood, not plague blood. The other kind, the kind that came from things not born of this world. You think I ran wild the moment the beast sank its teeth into my throat? While the thing inside me stretched and groaned to life, I buried myself from the eyes of men. I feared their fire tubes and iron traps more than I feared the moon. I feared their prayers even more. After I clawed my way out of the corpse trench, I moved by dusk light, my body bent wrong, like it hadn't decided what shape it wanted to hold yet. Every step ached. My ribs clicked when I turned. Something inside me pulsed beneath the skin, like a furnace trying to breathe. I found the old gunpowder cellar past Limehouse. Half sunk into the roots of a collapsed chapel, it had once held barrels meant for war but now held only silence and stone rot. Its door had rusted off its hinges. Ferns had crept down its walls like veins. And it didn't smell of death, not like the streets did. That made it safe. I slept there, or tried to, the fever wouldn't break. My body shivered even as I sweat through the dirt floor. Some nights I chewed the inside of my cheeks until they bled just to taste something warm. Some mornings I woke with claw marks in the walls. Not fingernails but claws. I didn't remember making them. I kept away from people. I didn't dare go near the markets or the roads. I'd crouch at the edge of the village commons at dusk and watch as men in thick leather coats hauled their sick to the fire pits. They didn't look up. They didn't speak to each other unless it was to spit or point. One man carried a boy in his arms, dead, limp, covered in waxcloth, and the way he tossed him onto the cart told me the boy meant nothing to him. That's how the plague had changed them. That's how they would have treated me. I stayed low, I watched, and when I couldn't ignore the hunger, I began to hunt. The first kill came behind an abandoned tannery near the river bend. The rats had grown bold since the plague drove men indoors, scuttling across meat hooks and leather strips left to dry years ago. When the largest one moved beneath a broken vat, I pounced. My hands moved faster than I thought possible, closed around its ribs, crushed them in one squeeze. It shrieked once, I dropped it before it finished. I didn't eat it, I couldn't, I buried it beneath the brick ash and dry lime, like that meant something. But it didn't stop there. The hunger grew sharper. It curled around my spine like a second skin. I moved further east, past Whitechapel, where the plague hadn't choked everything into silence. There, the animals were louder, quicker, full of life not yet choked by the black tongue of the disease. I watched foxes weave through the hedgerows, swift and cunning. I saw one limping, its hind leg twisted wrong. Maybe a trap, maybe just time. I followed it from the tree-line until it paused to sniff at a rotten apple beneath a ditch cross. That's when I took it. No hesitation, no mercy. Its fur was soft in my grip, its neck thinner than I expected. It didn't scream, it just twitched, like something already gone before I'd touched it. I buried that one too. Out of shame maybe, out of some memory of being human. But soon I stopped burying them. There was a clearing deep past the forked oaks of Waltham Chase, where the underbrush grew thick enough to choke a grown man. The ground was wet, always. The trees dripped with something that wasn't rain. That's where I took the stag. It was beautiful, massive antlers like roots twisted into a crown. It had no fear in its eyes when I leapt from the ridge. Maybe it didn't see me, or maybe it saw something it didn't believe in. I sank my teeth into its throat, not because I was hungry, but because something inside me needed to taste the moment the life left its eyes. Its legs kicked once, but I dug my claws deep enough to feel warm organs. The hunger grew and I couldn't stop chewing on the insides. It was the first time it felt being powerful. I wasn't a weakling anymore. This feeling is greater than the feeling of being satiated after a meal. It meant something, it meant rage, and I felt it growing inside. That night, I didn't hide. I stood in the clearing, naked and shaking, covered in blood not my own, and I let the night wrap around me like a second skin. I didn't howl. I wasn't there yet, but I remember opening my mouth, and nothing human came out. Back in the powder cellar, my body shifted again. Muscles bloomed along my back and shoulders, dense and wrong. My knees bent the other way. My jaw didn't sit straight anymore. There was pressure behind the bone, like something pushing forward. I watched a tooth loosen in the dark and fall into my palm. It was replaced by morning. That was the night the names started crawling back into the mouths of men, Silversmouth. They hadn't seen me. Not truly, but they'd seen what I left behind. Tracks too long to be wolves and not wide enough to be bears. For the color of bleached iron snagged on bramble. And always, a carcass, picked open like a book. I stayed in my cellar and carved notches into the wall for every kill. Not for pride, for record, my mind was slipping. I needed to remember. The boy in me feared what the beast was becoming. I still remembered my father's boots, thick, worn, always damp from the moors. I remembered his journal too, though I didn't yet know what it contained. Only that I had it. Only that he'd written it for a reason. Then came the full moon. The change wasn't beautiful. It wasn't graceful. It was violent. It came on like fever, then flame, then chains being torn apart from the inside. I collapsed onto the stone floor of the cellar, bones twisting, joints splitting and setting wrong. My fingernails tore off, only to be replaced by thick, curved talons. My tongue thickened. My jaw cracked. I felt myself splitting, unraveling, man and not man wrestling beneath the same skin. When I woke, I wasn't alone in the cellar. Something stared back at me from the reflection in the water barrel. A shape hunched, silver-furred, limbs too long, spine too bent. One canine was broken, snapped jagged like a tree cut halfway. I saw myself, but I wasn't me. I ran that night not because I wanted to kill, but because staying still felt like death. I moved through the night like wind through the teeth of the forest. Everything smelled too clear. Every leaf rustled with meaning. The scent of blood sang louder than any sermon bell. I chased deer for the thrill of it. I brought down a badger with one hand. The strength frightened me. The pleasure frightened me more. By dawn, I crawled back to the cellar on torn feet and shaking legs. Naked, numb and smiling. I was still afraid of men. But the part of me that had once begged for soup and warmth under a crumbling roof, that part had grown quiet. And above, in the towns, the whispers were growing bolder. Silver beast, they muttered at the pubs. One tooth missing. Too tall to be hound. Too clever to be wolf. Drako Silversmouth, they call him. Sometimes the dark didn't feel empty. It felt full, full of the things I didn't say out loud. Full of memories I never gave permission to return. I didn't know how long I'd been living in the cellar by then. The days bled together. Time didn't tick, it pulsed, like pain behind the eyes. There was no sunrise here. No clock tower. Just damp stone, roots that crept in from the chapel ruins above, and the sound of my own breathing, sometimes faster than it should have been. I was taller now. 6 feet, maybe a hair more, but I didn't stand straight anymore. My back was beginning to pull, and I walked more with a hunch than pride. My hands weren't hands. The fingers were thickening, nails pushing into something darker, less human. I had to stop using them to eat, or I'd tear into more than just the meat. I miss spoons. God's help me, I miss spoons. But I didn't want to go back. Not to the streets. Not to the humans. The thing is, animals kill because they're hungry. They sleep when they're tired. They protect their own. But men? Men lie. Men throw their sick into ditches with their names still in their mouths. Men burn their neighbors for sneezing too loud. I'd watched my mother pull away from me the moment my skin began to spot. She didn't cry. She didn't hold my hand. She shut the door before the fever even touched me. She was still human, and that made it worse. Sometimes I told myself I hated her, that I hated them both. Her for leaving me, and my father for being gone long before the plague ever came. He chased monsters, they said. Things with feathers and eyes that blinked sideways. He left sketches behind, claw marks on maps, names of places people weren't supposed to go. And I worshipped him for it. I thought one day I'd go with him. I'd hold a crossbow. I'd wear his coat. But he never came back. And when I started to change, I wondered if maybe he hadn't been hunting monsters after all. Maybe he'd become one. In the cellar, the silence was thick. It didn't comfort me. It pressed down on my chest when I tried to sleep. Some nights, I curled up in the far corner and just whispered to myself to keep the echo company. I'm not like them, I'd say. I'm not cruel like them. But I didn't believe it. Not after the fox. Not after the boar. Not after I looked at my own reflection in the rain barrel and didn't recognize the things staring back. There was still something human in me. I knew because it hurt. Every animal I killed stayed with me longer than it should have. The twitching, the heat of the blood, the sound of bone giving in. Those were things you were supposed to forget. But I didn't. I remembered every one of them. Sometimes I even said their names, not their real names, of course, but names I gave them, just to feel like I'd done something that wasn't monstrous. It was loneliness that fed me more than meat. It sharpened me, made the parts of me that still remembered lullabies ache. There was a moment, one I don't talk about often, when I stood outside a small farmhouse near the woods. Late evening, candlelight behind the shutters. I heard them laughing. A child, a woman, maybe 2 others. The warmth in their voices was so foreign it made my knees buckle. I didn't want to hurt them. I just wanted to stand there and pretend I'd knock on the door and they'd ask me to sit. Give me broth. Ask what I was doing out in the cold. But I didn't knock. I turned and ran. The human part of me was still alive. But it wasn't driving the cart anymore. It was just tied to the back wheel, getting dragged along the mud. I remember when I stopped praying. It was after a nightmare, a deep one, where my arms kept growing, my mouth filled with too many teeth, and I couldn't stop chewing. I woke up shaking, my head against the stone, nails digging into my forearms so deep they broke skin. I said the Lord's Prayer, twice, whispered it with blood on my lips. And nothing answered. That's when I knew. God had left this place. Or maybe I had. The thoughts weren't always bad. Sometimes they were quiet. Memories, small ones. My mother's voice humming when she thought I was asleep. My father showing me how to tie a tourniquet with one hand. The feeling of bread crust so hard it scraped your gums, but you ate it anyway because it was bread. But the longer I lived like this, the further those memories drifted. Like things floating in river water, fading the longer you watched. I was growing into something else. And the worst part? I didn't want to be human anymore. Not really. Because if I went back to being human, I'd have to feel all of this. Every wound, every memory. Every face that turned away when I begged for help. But the beast? The beast didn't cry. The beast didn't pray. The beast survived. And that was starting to feel like enough. It's funny how quiet things get when you stop fighting. The noise in my head was always there, snippets of my old life mixed with the hunger that gnawed at my bones. But the more I embraced it, the easier it became to drown out the sound of my own mind. The dark was my companion, and the dirt under my fingernails, my solace. Still, there were nights when something shifted. I'd be lying if I didn't admit that the shift terrified me. The first time I noticed it was after I found the journal. It was hidden in the farthest corner of the bunker, wedged between the remnants of my father's old belongings. Tools for hunting things he never spoke about, pieces of armor, and a rifle that hadn't fired a shot in years. There was no reason to keep the journal. I hadn't meant to open it. I had no intention of reading his scrawled thoughts, because somewhere in me, I feared what it might reveal, what he might have been. But something pulled me to it. Maybe it was my eyes, half-wolf now, catching the glint of something hidden under the dust, or maybe it was just the hunger for anything familiar. A trace of the man I remembered. I knew the handwriting. My father's loopy script, the one that used to scold me for not tying knots right. And though I hesitated, I opened it. I couldn't stop myself. The words were strange, rushed, scribbled in such a way that half the sentences barely made sense. But between the lines, between the ink stains and hurried scrawl, there was something else. A desperation that was almost like mine, like he knew what would come, like he could feel it. I read the first few pages and felt the room around me close in. It spoke of monsters, not the kind that lurked in the dark, but the kind that grew in men. How they hid behind thin masks of civility. It spoke of ancient beings that lived under the skin, and about the wolves, the true wolves, and how they were never meant to be controlled by human hands. That was when I realized my father hadn't been hunting just animals. The journal was a map of hunts, but not for trophies or skins. They were records of what he'd learned in his travels, ancient creatures, rituals, blood rites. My eyes caught the word man-wolves, circled several times. And under it, a sketch, a crude drawing of a beast almost like me, though less refined. Half human, half monster, no fangs, but claws. The name, Drako, was written in the corner. My father had known, had planned this to hunt a 6-foot wolf. I closed the journal. The thoughts it awakened were too much. But then there was the sound. I first heard it while pacing around the bunker, my feet moving restlessly across the ground, my hands tearing through the remnants of the room. Twigs snapped, thin, sharp, just outside. My heart, or whatever still resembled it, got alert. The scent of smoke from a nearby fire lingered, mixing with the sharpness of something else, something familiar, hunters. The smell of their flesh, their clothes, woven tight, dirty wool, soaked in sweat and the oil of 100 dead things. They were near. And then I saw the flicker of movement, the briefest flash of something, eyes. Not human, not an animal, something between. It was the hunters. I'd heard of them before, old men with hands that knew how to kill, how to track. They'd heard whispers of the creature in the woods, the silver beast that tore apart every animal it found, that left behind bodies too mangled to be anything but something other. I crouched low. The floor of the bunker was cold against my bare skin, but I felt nothing in comparison to the fire running through my veins. The beast, waking, stretching, clawing its way to the surface. It wasn't my choice anymore. The first instinct was to run, but that wasn't the pull I felt. I wanted to tear, to fight. I closed my eyes, feeling the sweat sting my brow as my body thrummed, skin crawling, bones shifting. The hunger in me twisted. And then came the second sound, voices. I swear, one of them muttered, I caught the scent just last night. It's near. We're close. Another voice, older, gruffer. We've been hunting for weeks. If it's near, it'll come. It always does. I'd heard enough. Their boots were now closer. Their steps were too sure for men who believed in the same stories they told in taverns. And they were hunting me. I could smell their fear, even from a distance. It was a sweet thing, but it wasn't enough to keep me hidden anymore. The moment had come. I couldn't stay crouched in the dark. I couldn't wait for them to find me. The beast was too close to the surface. I took a breath, deep enough to fill my lungs with every scent of the forest, the earth, the men, and then I slowly, silently, pulled myself to the doorway. The wind shifted, I could feel it on my skin. They were close. But I wasn't ready. But there was something else. A pull in my gut, something darker. A temptation. A whisper that dripped in my blood like poison. The hunt had always been for animals. But what if the prey was something else? What if they were the prey? The temptation simmered. The thought of human flesh, tender and warm, the pulse of life in it. It was there, like a fire at the end of a long, cold tunnel. And something in me wanted to run toward it. I slipped back into the shadows of the bunker, the weight of my father's journal pressing on me. That damn journal that seemed to know me better than I knew myself. I didn't have the answers I was looking for. I didn't know what kind of monster I was becoming. But the line between man and beast was starting to blur. And I had to wonder, if I crossed it, would I ever come back? I ran as fast as my 2 clawed legs could carry. I ran out of fear, anger, and mixed temptations. I was alone. All I wanted was to be left undisturbed. The plague had ravaged everything, leaving behind only the dead and the dying. I remember the heat of that summer. The stench of sickness clung to everything, and the air felt thick with disease. People whispered in the streets, their voices hushed, like the plague itself could hear them. I didn't understand it then, but the way their faces twisted in fear, the way the earth seemed to swallow the bodies of the dead without care, it all marked something dark within me. I wasn't like them anymore. I couldn't be. I was alive in a way I hadn't been before, cursed, maybe, or chosen by fate. I didn't know, but I was stronger now, quicker, more aware of everything. My senses were sharper, more intense. The world had become a place of opportunity, yet terror all at once. I had learned to hide, to avoid the people who once knew me. Family, neighbors. The plague doctor had declared me dead. In truth, I had died. But now, something else lived within me. Something that hungered. And I was learning quickly that hunger didn't care for boundaries. The first time I killed a human, I wasn't hunting out of malice. I was curious. The days after the plague had begun to recede were quieter, and the hunger in my chest had begun to grow, gnawing at me, pushing me to seek something more. It was then that I found them, the family that had been torn apart. I had been stalking through the woods, tracing the scent of foxes and rabbits, when I came across their cottage. It wasn't far from the village, a small, isolated place nestled near the edge of the forest. Something else lingered in the air, fear. I watched through the trees. The scene inside the house was ugly, violent. The father, an older man with a thick beard and cruel eyes, was yelling at his children, the crack of his fists meeting their skin like a sickening rhythm. The children, 2 boys, maybe no older than 10, screamed, their small bodies curling up against the wooden walls, cowering from the blows. I don't know why I stayed. Maybe I was still clinging to some trace of what was human in me. The sickening sound of the father's rage, his cruelty, was something I understood. It felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. But there was more to it than that. As I watched, the darkness inside me stirred. The hunger, but also something else. I had been watching the world for too long, seeing its cruelty, its greed, its selfishness. People abandoned their own, turned their backs on the weak, left the suffering to rot in the streets. They were no better than the wolves that tore through the villages, tearing at anything weak enough to be caught. The beast inside me felt a shift, as though it was waking up. Something in me snapped. I stepped forward, out of the shadows. The scent of blood from the father's brutal blows reached my nostrils. My body shook with the hunger, but I didn't move. Not yet. I needed to see more. I needed to understand why it had to be this way. The moment came suddenly. The father turned to face the children, his face red with anger. His hand shot out, grabbing one of them by the throat. His voice was hoarse, low with fury. I didn't think, I didn't reason. I lunged. The man didn't see me coming. He couldn't. I was faster than a human should be. My claws sank deep into his chest, the pressure of the impact lifting him off the ground. The father's scream was cut short as I twisted, throwing him aside like a rag doll. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud, and there was only silence. I turned to the children. Their eyes, wide with terror, stared at me as if they had seen the devil himself. I saw the fear in them, but I couldn't stop. The hunger was too strong now. But before I could take another step, something stopped me. The boy on the left, no older than 6 or 7, was staring at me with wide, pleading eyes. He didn't scream, didn't run. He just looked at me. His gaze wasn't that of an animal cowering before a predator. It was the gaze of a human. And in that moment, I froze. The boy's eyes reminded me of something. Of my own childhood, of the people I had once known. It was like looking at a mirror, but the reflection was broken. I wasn't human anymore. I turned away from them and bolted into the woods, my mind racing, my body trembling with the aftermath of what I had done. The hunger had been sated, but there was no satisfaction in it. No joy, only emptiness. The days following that night were a blur. The hunger still clawed at me, gnawing and relentless, but I kept to the shadows, avoided the humans, and tried to find some semblance of peace. But it was never the same. The world was no longer the same. The plague had ended. The streets were quieter. People returned to their homes. The Black Death had passed, but something else had taken its place. The plague had killed many, but it had also left behind the worst of humanity, the greed, the cruelty, the selfishness. People had learned nothing they never did. The real monsters weren't the beasts that walked on 4 legs. It was the ones that walked on 2. I had become a reflection of them, and it made me sick. But there was a part of me, deep inside, that still clung to something human. I didn't want to be a monster, but maybe I was already too far gone. The forest was always darker on the other side. The ancient woods I wandered in had always been a safe place, a place where I could hunt and hide away from the eyes of men. But this was different. The forest was alive with something more than just the wind and the rustling of leaves. There was a weight in the air, a presence that seemed to loom over me, even when I couldn't see it. I had ventured deeper into the Hemlock oak forest, the thick expanse of land that stretched miles from the villages, a place forgotten by most. The trees were old here, ancient, and their bark had a grayish hue, as if time itself had worn them down. The ground was spongy, soft underfoot, filled with the smell of damp earth and rotting leaves. It was here, in the depths of this forest, that I first heard the growls. At first, I thought it was the wind, stirring in the branches. But it was something else. I crouched low, my senses alert, and followed the sound. There was no question now. It was the unmistakable growl of wolves. Not ordinary wolves, either. There was a strange quality to the sound, a deep, guttural vibration that stirred something primal in me. I knew what they were long before I laid eyes on them. They were like me, werewolves. They came into view then, emerging from the shadows of the trees. At first, I saw only silhouettes, large shapes moving through the dense undergrowth. As they drew nearer, I saw their forms clearly, their fur dark as night, their eyes gleaming with a feral intelligence. There were 7 of them, moving together with an eerie synchronicity, as though they were one creature, not many. Their leader, a massive brute of a wolf, had fur streaked with silver, and his eyes were the color of steel. I watched from behind a tree, my heart pounding in my chest. This was the pack. They moved like gods of the wild, their bodies a perfect fusion of beast and man. I had been tracking them for days, following their trail, curious, but now I was close, too close, and the scent of them filled my lungs. They were hunters, I could see it now. The way they moved, the way they stalked through the woods, it was second nature to them. I stayed hidden, watching as they cornered a herd of wild boars. There was no hesitation, no mercy. The alpha lunged first, massive jaws closing on the neck of a boar with brutality, slicing the neck off the torso with one strike. The others followed, moving with terrifying speed, taking down their prey with a ruthlessness I had never seen before. I could feel the thrill in the air, the hunger, as the pack tore into the flesh of their catch. I had hunted before, but this was something different. It was beautiful, but also terrifying. As the pack feasted, I felt a strange yearning deep inside me. I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to hunt like them. I wanted to feel that power, the strength, the unity. But I was different. I wasn't like them. Not yet. They knew it. I could see it in their eyes. They didn't speak, but the way they moved around me, circling, keeping their distance, said everything. I was the frail one. The pack would never accept me. The days that followed were long, and I spent them hiding in the shadows of Hemlock, watching the pack from afar. They never acknowledged me. They never came close. The only time they noticed me was when I was foolish enough to come too near. The alpha, he never looked at me, not once, except for that brief, assessing glance that made it clear I was an outsider. The others, they were just as indifferent. They hunted in groups, never pausing to look back at the small figure trailing behind them, desperately trying to keep up. I was weak, not yet fully grown, still more human than wolf. I started hunting on my own again, returning to the small creatures of the woods, but the satisfaction wasn't the same. It wasn't enough. The hunger within me had grown, and no matter how much I killed, I couldn't fill the emptiness inside. There was always this gnawing thought at the back of my mind. Why am I different? Why can't I be like them? It wasn't long before I encountered the hunter. I'd been tracking a small group of deer through the forest, moving carefully, when I heard the crack of a branch breaking. My instincts told me to retreat into the shadows, but I hesitated. There was something about the scent, human, that made me linger. I turned slowly, watching through the trees. The hunter was alone, a tall man with a scarred face and a long, weathered coat. He had a crossbow slung across his back, and a dagger was sheathed at his side. His eyes scanned the forest, sharp, alert, and just a little too focused. He had been tracking me. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, as if he could sense my presence, but he couldn't quite place it. He moved cautiously, scanning the trees, moving deeper into the woods. But then, he turned in my direction. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I froze. He couldn't see me, not truly. But in that moment, I felt a sickening jolt in my chest. There was a part of me that wanted to stay hidden, to avoid the confrontation. But there was another part, the beast, that wanted to confront him, to see if he could sense the truth of what I was. Instead, I backed away slowly, vanishing into the shadows of the trees. My heartbeat quickened, and a cold sweat trickled down my neck. The hunter didn't follow, but I could feel him. He knew something was out there. That night, I lay awake under the twisted branches of a dead oak tree, my thoughts a storm of confusion and rage. I wasn't human anymore. I wasn't part of the pack. I was something in between, something that didn't belong anywhere. The more I thought about it, the more it hurt. My human side, the one that longed for companionship, for understanding, for connection, was slipping away. And the more I gave in to the beast, the more I feared I would lose it forever. I wasn't sure I cared anymore. The days that followed my last encounter with the hunter in Hemlock Forest were long. I could hear his boots crunching against the dried leaves in my mind, as though he was still out there somewhere, searching for me. My body and mind were at war. The hunter's gaze had pierced through the darkness of the woods like a spear, and his scent, blended with the stench of metal and sweat, had haunted me long after he'd vanished. I knew he was still out there watching, and as I ran through the dense trees, that instinct, the same primal instinct that kept me alive, told me that it was only a matter of time before he would find me. But something more frightening had come with that hunter's presence. The reality that the world was no longer mine to hide in. There was a clawing sensation in my chest. At first, I thought it was hunger, like a beast clawing from the inside. But it was more than that. It was something deeper, something that grew every time I saw the pack or tasted the blood of the wild. I had always known the beast lurked within, but now it was pressing its way to the surface with each passing day. Every time I walked through the woods, whether along the cold, crumbling stones of Silverglen Road, the path that connected the forgotten hamlets, or through the eerie Witch's Hollow, where even the oldest trees seemed to whisper in a tongue of their own, something shifted within me. I could hear things clearer now. The faint whisper of a bird's wings as it flew above the canopy, the distant rattle of a rattlesnake coiling itself along the path, the rustling of leaves underfoot as small creatures scurried to escape me. Every sound was sharper. Every scent was more vivid. My senses had sharpened to the point where I could feel the earth beneath me shift, its pulse almost as palpable as my own. I had become more than a wolf. The days that followed my last encounter with the hunter in Hemlock Forest were long. I could hear his boots crunching against the dried leaves in my mind, as though he was still out there somewhere, searching for me. My body and mind were at war. The hunter's gaze had pierced through the darkness of the woods like a spear, and his scent, blended with the stench of metal and sweat, had haunted me long after he'd vanished. I knew he was still out there watching, and as I ran through the dense trees, that instinct, the same primal instinct that kept me alive, told me that it was only a matter of time before he would find me. But something more frightening had come with that hunter's presence. The reality that the world was no longer mine to hide in. There was a clawing sensation in my chest. At first, I thought it was hunger, like a beast clawing from the inside. But it was more than that. It was something deeper, something that grew every time I saw the pack or tasted the blood of the wild. I had always known the beast lurked within, but now it was pressing its way to the surface with each passing day. Every time I walked through the woods, whether along the cold, crumbling stones of Silverglen Road, the path that connected the forgotten hamlets, or through the eerie Witch's Hollow, where even the oldest trees seemed to whisper in a tongue of their own, something shifted within me. I could hear things clearer now. The faint whisper of a bird's wings as it flew above the canopy, the distant rattle of a rattlesnake coiling itself along the path, the rustling of leaves underfoot as small creatures scurried to escape me. Every sound was sharper. Every scent was more vivid. My senses had sharpened to the point where I could feel the earth beneath me shift, its pulse almost as palpable as my own. I had become more than a wolf. I moved deeper into Hemlock Forest, a place where the trees never seemed to fully let in the sun. It was a place of darkness, a place where things hid. Even the animals here were different, more wild, more elusive. For days, I had stalked the pack, never getting too close but never able to turn away from their raw power. They were perfect, everything I had once dreamed of becoming. The pack, with its alpha, Volgar, the largest and strongest of them all, was a force to be reckoned with. Volgar had silver-streaked fur, a large scar running across his muzzle that gave him a terrifying presence. His eyes were hard like steel, cold and calculating. The others were just as wild and fierce. But they never acknowledged me, not once. I was a shadow to them, an afterthought. To them, I was not even a threat. And yet, I watched as they tore through the forest, hunting down prey, their ferocity unmatched. A few days ago, I watched as they took down a pair of wild boars in less time than it took me to hunt a single rabbit. Their movements were fluid, coordinated, like a single living creature, and I wanted to be part of that. I wanted to be like them, strong, untouchable. But I was weak. I was not fully grown yet. One evening, as I was wandering along Redthorn Lane, a twisted stretch of path that led out of the village, my senses flared. The familiar scent of metal and smoke hung in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of pine. A flicker of movement caught my eye. My blood ran cold. The hunter, he had followed me. I could hear his breathing, steady, and the rustle of his coat against the brush. It was as if he were stalking me just as I had stalked the pack. Not again, I was tired of running. But I could feel it, the urge to confront him, to test myself. Could I take him down? Could I prove to myself that I was more than the frail one? My claws twitched at my sides, aching for release, but I held back. I hid in the shadows as he moved closer, unaware of my presence. I could smell his scent, the salt of his sweat mixed with the faint odor of gunpowder. His eyes scanned the trees, searching, but never once did they settle on me. The thought of facing him, of ending this pursuit, both terrified and exhilarated me. But it wasn't the confrontation with the hunter that gnawed at me. It was the knowledge that I wasn't human anymore, not truly. It wasn't just my senses that had changed. My strength had grown too. I could feel it in my bones, in the sinew of my muscles. My hands had become claws, my teeth sharper, more capable of tearing through flesh with ease. I could hear the heartbeat of an animal from miles away. I could feel the wind shift across my skin like it was an extension of myself. But it wasn't just physical. There was power in my mind too. The wolf inside me, the beast, whispered to me. It told me to kill, to feed, to take what I wanted. And sometimes it took every ounce of willpower to hold it back. But there was something else, the pull of humanity, faint and dying, but still there. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw a flash of my past. My parents, my life, my humanity. That night, the pack ventured into Witch's Hollow, the land where old witches were said to have practiced their magic centuries ago. The trees in that part of the forest were twisted, blackened, their bark slick with something unnatural. The pack moved in unison, prowling along the dim trail, their eyes glowing in the night. I followed them, keeping my distance. I wanted to prove myself to them, to show them that I was no longer the weak, frail creature they had rejected. But when I tried to approach them, they moved away from me, as if my presence disgusted them. Vulgar's eyes flicked over me for the briefest moment, a dismissive glance that made my blood boil. In the weeks that followed, I began to lose track of time. My internal struggle was reaching its peak. The human side of me, the part that had known love, compassion, fear, was slipping away with each hunt, each moment I spent alone in the forest. The more I embraced the beast, the more it consumed me. I had stopped caring about anything except the hunt. I stopped caring about my past, about my family. The hunger was a constant thing, gnawing at me, telling me to kill, to feed, to survive. But as I sat alone in the woods one night, looking at the moon through the branches of an ancient oak, a thought crept into my mind. What if I killed a human? It was a thought I had never entertained before. But now, with the hunger clawing at me, the temptation was too strong to ignore. I had seen the pack kill without hesitation. Volgar had feasted on the flesh of men. His eyes had gleamed with hunger, not remorse. What was stopping me? I moved through the woods, my steps silent, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Then I saw them, a group of travelers, their campfire flickering in the distance. They were not far from the path, unprotected, unaware of the predator watching them from the shadows. This is it, I could feel the change sweeping through me, the animal instincts taking over. The voices of my humanity whispered for a moment, but they were drowned out by the roaring hunger of the beast. I wanted to kill, I wanted to tear into them. But as I crept closer, something stopped me. The children, they were small, huddled close to their mother, their eyes wide with innocence. They didn't deserve this. And yet, the beast inside me screamed for blood. I stepped back, retreating into the shadows of the trees, leaving them untouched. For a brief moment, I had been on the brink of crossing the final line. But something, some flicker of my humanity, had held me back. It wouldn't last. I knew that. One night, as I roamed the streets of the town, once a place of comfort, now an unfamiliar, threatening world, I realized how easily humans were consumed by their own false sense of security. They went about their lives, unaware of the beast that walked among them. The streets, once full of the clatter of daily life, had become deathly silent. The houses I passed, with their wooden frames and thick smoke rising from chimneys, felt like tombs, each door a small, fragile portal to a life waiting to be extinguished. I stood at the edge of Redthorn Alley. I could see them now, fragile humans, dressed in tattered clothes, faces etched with exhaustion. They walked past me without seeing me, unaware of the predator moving in their midst. The scent of flesh, fresh, alive, lingered in the air, and it was no longer a mere whisper in my nostrils. I could feel the pounding of their hearts, even from the distance. Each beat sent a pulse of desire deep within my core, and I knew that soon I would satisfy it. My senses had changed. It was as if the world had been sharpened, made clearer, sharper, more vibrant. I could hear the smallest of sounds, the flutter of a mouse's heartbeat in the underbrush, the rustle of leaves as a bird took flight. And my hearing had become something more than just perception. I could hear the pulse of life itself. I focused on the human figures moving down the alley. They were oblivious to me, but I could sense them, each of them like an open book to me. The girl who passed closest to me, her face turned downward, was the one I noticed most. Her blood pulsed in her neck, the veins visible through her skin. It was a tempting sight. The sound of it, the slow, deliberate thud of her heart, was like music to my ears. But I stayed still. The craving, the hunger, was so fierce now that I feared it would consume me entirely. I could not help but feel the deep, all-encompassing contrast between what I had become and what they were. The humans, these fragile creatures, seemed so weak, so fragile. They moved through life with their heads down, burdened with the weight of their existence, while I stood in the shadows, able to tear them apart with a single swipe of my claws. They walked with such confidence, yet the truth was they were no more secure than rabbits in the wild, waiting to be torn apart by something much stronger than they could ever comprehend. And that was the beauty of it. Their fear, their fragility, their limited understanding of the world around them was what made them the perfect prey. Their weakness was what made their deaths so sweet. As I ventured further into the woods beyond the town, the change became even more apparent. As I stepped deeper into the woods, the forest seemed to quiet, as though it recognized me. I had learned to move through the trees with a hunter's grace. The birds had ceased their songs. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. It was as though the woods themselves were aware of the predator that had entered their midst. Even the nocturnal animals that had once filled the night with their sounds now slinked away, retreating into the deep recesses of the forest. I could feel the pulse of life in everything. The trees, their leaves rustling with the wind, the animals in the underbrush, their hearts beating in rhythm with mine. But most powerful of all was the scent of fear. It hung in the air like an intoxicating perfume. The taste of fear, mixed with the adrenaline that coursed through my body, made me feel powerful. I was no longer an innocent child. I had become a creature, a king of the night. I could hear every heartbeat, smell every drop of blood, and see the terror in their eyes. I was the predator, and they were the prey. I had walked the streets of the town for hours before I finally stopped outside one of the homes. A family was inside, preparing to settle for the night. They had no idea I was there, watching, waiting. The man stepped out of his house, and that was when I knew. He was alone, his back to me, moving toward the shed at the far edge of his property. I moved swiftly, as silent as the shadows that clung to the corners of the alley. There was no hesitation now. My body was primed, my senses sharpened. The hunger roared within me. I pounced, my claws dug into his flesh as I brought him down. He struggled, but I was too strong. His gasps were shallow as I silenced him. His blood was warm in my mouth as it splattered. The taste was unlike anything I had ever experienced. Rich and intoxicating, it flooded my senses in a rush of power. But it wasn't just his flesh, it was the power of life I had taken, the final break between the human boy I had been and the monster I had become. The world around me seemed to stop as I stood over his body. The town was silent now, the wind still. The weight of what I had done pressed down on me, but for the first time in years, there was no regret. There was no fear. There was only satisfaction. I had crossed the line. There was no going back. The human part of me, the boy who had once feared this transformation, was gone. The beast, the predator, the king of the night, had claimed its place within me. The hunger was no longer a whisper in the back of my mind, it was a roar. It was in the depths of the forest, as the shadows of the trees stretched like fingers across the earth, that I came across the faintest memory. A memory of my old life. A flicker of a face, a woman's face, my mother. Hands that once held me, hands trembling as she whispered lullabies, her eyes filled with warmth. But I didn't remember much. Only fragments, pieces of a life that had slipped through my fingers like sand. I had tried so hard to forget it all, to bury the human part of me beneath layers of fur and claws. But now, in the silence of the night, the memories came flooding back in vivid flashes. The sound of her voice, the smell of her hair, the warmth of her touch. And then, there was the pain, the cold sting of betrayal. She had abandoned me, left me to die. I stood frozen in the forest, the full moon casting its light over me, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of that loss. The loss of my humanity. The loss of who I had once been. A strange mix of grief and rage surged through me. I could feel the rage of the beast inside, demanding that I let go of these feelings, demanding that I embrace the predator I had become. But then, there was the grief, the human side of me, crying out for what had been lost. I heard footsteps in the distance, and my senses flared to life again. A figure emerged from the shadows. A human. A man, seemingly lost, wandering the woods at night. His heart raced, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I paused, my instincts screaming at me to strike. To kill, to feast, but then I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. He looked at me with fear, but there was something else there too. He wasn't just terrified of me, he was also desperate. He was alone, lost, he was a reflection of who I had once been. A fragile human, struggling to survive in a world that was indifferent. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I hesitated. The beast inside me urged me to tear him apart. But the human in me, the part that had once been my essence, held me back. I didn't strike. I didn't kill. Instead, I watched him for a long moment, before retreating into the darkness, leaving him to find his own way. Maybe he shall share the tale of a beast that towered over him, yet left him to live. It doesn't matter anyway, these humans are the true monsters. But the hesitation was fleeting. As I wandered deeper into the woods, the scent of something else filled the air. A pack, a group of werewolves. They were nearby, and I could feel their presence like a storm rolling in. The pack emerged from the shadows, tall, muscular figures with eyes glowing like embers in the darkness. They were unlike any wolves I had encountered before. Their movements were fluid, synchronized, and their auras, each one of them, was thick with power. I was drawn to them, curious. They were the second pack I had encountered since my transformation. Wanted to be part of something, to find a place where I could truly belong. They sniffed the air and eyed me with disdain. I could feel their judgment, the way they saw me as an outsider. The frail one, the one who had not fully embraced his true form. The leader of the pack, a towering figure with fur as dark as night, stepped forward. He looked at me with contempt in his eyes, gave a howl to the full moon above, and then looked into my eyes. Matted fur, brown and silver, with scars on his face. I might as well call him Scarface. But there was something else too, something in the way they looked at me. It wasn't just pity. It was respect of what I could become. They could foresee the power that now pulsed through my veins. And in that moment, I realized that I had fully embraced the darkness. I was no longer Drako, the boy who had once dreamed of a better life. I was Drako Silversmouth, the beast, the monster, and nothing in this world would ever change that. As I prowled deeper into the night, I felt the weight of my transformation settle around me like a cloak. The forest went silent as I walked. The air seemed to part before me, every creature sensing the shift. The silence that followed me now was different. It was not the silence of a lone wanderer. It was the silence of a predator whose aura made even the trees bow in submission. Time went by and I evolved. I had grown accustomed to the hunt, the raw, instinctive pull of it that made me feel as though I was born for this. The feeling of power, the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of taking life. But tonight, something was different. There was a new presence in the forest. One that didn't belong here. I was no longer the naive beast, hungry and unsure. I could sense the hunter even before he stepped into my path. The unnatural quiet, the way the air seemed to hum with anticipation. This was a man who had come prepared. He wasn't a simple peasant, out here with a crude bow. No, he was something more. A true predator in his own right. And I knew he had come for me. I had hunted humans in the past, picked them off from the fringes of society, their hearts beating wildly, their lives too fragile to last long against the fury of the beast. But this man, he was different. I heard his boots crunching the leaves in the distance, his breathing steady, his movements calculated. He was tracking me, no doubt aware of my presence, yet determined to close the distance. He was confident, he believed himself capable of killing me. It was almost laughable in a way. Humans, thinking they could best a force of nature, thinking they could control what they did not understand. But I wasn't laughing. Not this time. There was no amusement in me now, only a bitter, gnawing hatred that had been festering for so long. The same hatred that had fueled the beast inside me. I paused in my tracks, knowing this would be the moment. He was getting too close. I could feel his eyes on me, even in the thick darkness of the woods. His heartbeat echoed in the silence. But beneath that, there was an undercurrent of fear. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I could taste it. And that fear tasted like victory to me. I moved swiftly, sliding between the trees, my steps silent, until I was within striking distance. And then, in an instant, he turned toward me. I could see the glint of the silver barrel of his rifle gleam in the moonlight as he raised it, aimed directly at my chest. The crack of the rifle's shot was deafening in the stillness, the sound so sharp it felt like the world itself had been torn apart. I felt a searing pain tear through my side. The bullet, silver, tore through my flesh, the cold bite of it cutting deep. It wasn't the first time I had been hit, but silver was different. My body convulsed with pain, the sharp sting so intense it made me stagger back, a guttural growl ripping from my throat. And then the pain worsened. I felt something break inside my mouth, a sharp, almost unbearable pressure in my jaw. My canine tooth had snapped under the force of the bullet's impact. The pain burned like fire, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse from the intensity of it. But I didn't collapse. The pain, it only made the rage grow. The rage I had been harboring for so long, the rage that had been building ever since I had been abandoned by my own kin, left to die in the streets, just another casualty of the plague. I was no longer just the beast, angry and afraid. I had become something more. I had become a force of nature, something that was beyond human understanding. And I would not let this hunter, this man, this fragile human, stand in my way. I was mere inches away from him now, the pain in my side forgotten, swallowed by the growing hunger. My eyes burned with an intensity that made his face pale. The faint smell of sweat, fear, and a strange mixture of alcohol and gunpowder clung to him. The rifle, the silver rifle, was still clenched tightly in his hands, though I knew it wouldn't stop me now. Not when I was this close. I let out a low growl, the sound rumbling deep within my chest, sending a shiver through his body. I could see the slight tremor in his hands as he gripped the rifle, but he didn't pull the trigger. We stood there for a long moment, a strange stillness between us. It felt like the calm before a storm. I could taste the silver in the air, the heat of the anger that pulsed in my veins. He had tried to kill me. Instead, I leaned forward, and with a swift motion, I grabbed the barrel of his rifle. My broken canine tooth, a small but sharp thing, bit down on it, and I snapped the barrel in half. The silver cracked like brittle bone under the weight of my fury. His eyes widened in horror, but I did not kill him. I stood there, my breath hot on his face, feeling the weight of the moment settle on both of us. His life was in my hands, and yet I spared him. Why did I spare him? I let go of his rifle, my claws brushing against his fingers as I stepped back. The tension between us was thick, too thick to ignore. I could have killed him, but instead I let him live. He would leave this forest, knowing that the beast was real, knowing that the predator he had come to hunt had spared him. It was my vengeance, not just for me, but for the beast I had become. I stared at him one last time, and then, without another word, I turned away. The forest was silent again as I disappeared into the shadows, leaving the hunter standing alone, his rifle broken at his feet. Let them fear my name, Drako Silversmouth. I shall rise to claim what's rightfully mine, my place in the world. If you love the story, please hit a like and do subscribe to the channel. Your support means a lot. Thank you very much.